There was a time when British television made programs that made the entire nation sit down together at 7 o'clock on a Saturday night. Programs with characters we quoted at work the following morning. Programs that ran for years, drew audiences of 18 and 20 million viewers, and won awards for their writers and their stars. And programs that today, in the second half of the 2020s, could not be commissioned by any British broadcaster, not the BBC, not ITV, not Channel 4, not the streaming services. Some of them were pulled off the air in their own time. Some of them ran for years, ended naturally, and were only quietly buried afterwards. Some of them were defended by their own stars for decades, and some are still defended today. This documentary is not about condemning them. It is not about excusing them either. It is about 8 British sitcoms and 1 long-running variety show, programs that shaped how a generation of Britons laughed, argued, and understood their own country. Programs that, if a young writer walked into a modern commissioning meeting today with the exact same script, would be turned down within minutes. These are 8 British sitcoms that would be cancelled today. Mind Your Language premiered on ITV on the 30th of December, 1977. It was a sitcom about a night class teacher who taught English as a foreign language to a group of adult immigrants at an evening school in London. The teacher was played by Barry Evans. His students represented, in deliberately exaggerated form, national stereotypes from around the world. A macho Italian named Giovanni, a dour German named Anna, a flirtatious Frenchwoman named Danielle, a Chinese communist student named Chung-Soo Lee, who quoted Chairman Mao in every episode, a Pakistani named Ali, a Sikh named Ranjit, a Greek named Maximilian. The humor came from misunderstandings, from the students' broken English, from cultural clashes and pronunciation mistakes. At its peak, Mind Your Language reached an audience of around 18 million viewers. The series had been commissioned by Michael Grade, then Director of Programmes at London Weekend Television. 2 years later, Michael Grade himself cancelled it. The stated reason was that the stereotyping had become offensive. The audience that had climbed close to 18 million was, effectively, being told that what they were laughing at was wrong. Barry Evans, who played the teacher, was 36 years old when the show was cancelled. He would never recover his career at that level again. He tried other roles. He struggled, and in February 1997, at the age of 53, he was found dead alone in his home in Claybrook Magna in the county of Leicestershire. His death remained unexplained, and an open verdict was recorded. Dino Shafiq, who played the Pakistani student Ali, died just 5 years after the show's cancellation. He was 53 years old. A heart attack. Albert Moses, who played Ranjit the Sikh, went on to a long career in British television and film. When he passed away in 2017, he was 80. The show remained hugely popular abroad, particularly in Pakistan, India, Sri Lanka, and Nigeria, where audiences saw it not as a mockery of themselves, but as a warm portrait of foreigners trying to succeed in London. Michael Grade would later express regret for commissioning it. He never expressed regret for cancelling it. The cancellation was not quite the end. An independent production company revived Mind Your Language for a 4th series in 1986, with Barry Evans and several original cast members returning. But the revival was shown unevenly across the ITV regions and failed to restore the programme to its former national prominence. It Ain't Half Hot Mum was written by Jimmy Perry and David Croft, the same men who had created Dad's Army. It was set in a Royal Artillery concert party stationed in India and Burma in the closing months of the Second World War, and it was based, in significant part, on Jimmy Perry's own wartime experiences serving with a similar unit. David Croft had served as a major in the Royal Artillery in North Africa, India, and Singapore. Jimmy Perry had actually been in a wartime concert party in Deolali in India. What they wrote came, in significant part, from what they had lived. The show ran for 8 series, from January 1974 to September 1981. It attracted audiences of up to 17 million viewers. In 1975, the theme performed by two of its stars, Windsor Davies and Don Estelle, reached #1 in the British charts and remained there for 3 weeks. At the centre of the controversy stood one character, the concert party's Indian native bearer, Rangi Ram, played by Michael Bates, a white British actor who wore darkening makeup for the role. Michael Bates had been born in Jhansi in British India in December 1920. He had grown up speaking Hindi and Urdu as a child. He had served as a major in the 9th Gurkha Rifles, a regiment of the British Indian Army, during the Second World War itself. When he took on the role of Rangi Ram, he brought a lifetime of authentic knowledge of the culture he was portraying. But he was a white actor wearing makeup to appear Indian, and to modern eyes, that has come to be described as brownface, a variation of blackface. Michael Bates died of cancer in January 1978, aged 57, midway through the show's run. His character was never officially written out. Rangi Ram simply disappeared from the concert party without explanation. The show continued for another 3 years. Jimmy Perry defended the casting until his own death in 2016 at the age of 93. His position, Bates wore only a light tan and had spoken fluent Urdu and had served with the Gurkhas. In Perry's view, the series represented the historical truth of what British India had looked like. His verdict on the BBC's refusal to repeat the show, that the corporation was taking the cowardly way out. The BBC has not repeated It Ain't Half Hot Mum on its mainstream television channels for decades. The complete series remains available on home video, but the programme has effectively disappeared from the corporation's regular broadcast schedules. Unlike Dad's Army, Porridge and The Good Life, all made in the same era, repeats do not air on BBC channels. Windsor Davies, the Welsh actor who played Sergeant Major Williams, died in January 2019 at the age of 88. Melvin Hayes is still alive. Not a sitcom, strictly speaking, but no honest documentary about British television and racial content could omit it. The black and white minstrel show ran on BBC primetime Saturday evenings for 20 years. It won the Golden Rose of Montreux in 1961. At its peak, it was watched by 21 million people. And every week, its male performers appeared on screen in blackface makeup. The programme was created in 1958 by BBC producer George Innes and musical director George Mitchell. It was a variety show. Traditional American minstrel songs, country music, show tunes, and music hall numbers, performed with lavish costumes and full stage production. The male performers, known as the Mitchell Minstrels, wore full blackface makeup. The female dancers, known as the television toppers, did not. By the mid-1960s, the format had become the subject of public criticism. In 1967, with the show already 9 years into its run, the Campaign Against Racial Discrimination formally petitioned the BBC to cancel it. The BBC declined. In 1969, the BBC did attempt a version of the show without blackface, called Music, Music, Music. It ran for 10 episodes and failed. The black and white minstrel show returned to its original format and continued for another 9 years. In 1975, a 16-year-old comedian named Lenny Henry made his television breakthrough on the talent show New Faces. In the same year, he joined the touring stage production of the Black and White Minstrel Show and would later appear on the televised version. He was the first black performer to work within the minstrel show productions. Lenny Henry has since described his time on the show in interviews given decades later as a grotesque parody of black people. In a 2015 interview with The Times, his own words for the experience were a wormhole of depression that he had never fully escaped. He was contractually obliged to appear at the time. He would go on in the 1980s and beyond to become one of Britain's most successful comedians and the driving force behind comic relief. He was knighted in 2015. The final television edition of the Black and White Minstrel Show was broadcast on the 21st of July 1978. The programme had remained a recurring part of BBC television for 20 years. By the standards of many historians who have since written about the period, its removal from the schedules had come shockingly late. Curry and Chips lasted 6 episodes. It ran from the 21st of November to the 26th of December 1969. Then, the Independent Television Authority, the ITA, the regulator which oversaw commercial television in Britain at that time, ordered it off the air. It was the shortest life of any program in this documentary, and in many ways, the most extreme. The idea came from Spike Milligan, the surrealist genius behind The Goon Show. Milligan proposed a character named Kevin O'Grady, an Anglo-Pakistani factory worker with an Irish father and a Pakistani mother. He wanted to write a comedy that would expose racism by holding it up to ridicule. The script was actually written by Johnny Speight, the same man who had created Till Death Us Do Part. Speight had made a career out of putting bigoted characters on television in the hope that audiences would recognize their own prejudices reflected back at them. The foreman was played by Eric Sykes, one of the most beloved and gentle comic figures in British broadcasting. Sykes refused to use bad language himself and was uneasy with parts of the script. Complaints flooded in, from immigrant community groups, from the Race Relations Board, from ordinary viewers. One complaint counted 59 uses of the word bloody in a single episode. The ITA reviewed the program and cancelled it after the 6th episode. Among the supporting cast was Sam Kidd, a real-life former prisoner of war who had spent nearly 5 years in Stalag 20A after being captured at Calais in May 1940. Sam Kidd was, by 1969, one of the most prolific British character actors of his generation. He would go on to appear in nearly 300 films and television programs before his death in 1982. Spike Milligan died in 2002, aged 83. Eric Sykes died in 2012, aged 89. Kenny Lynch, who played the character of Kenny in Curry and Chips, died in 2019, aged 81. All 6 episodes of Curry and Chips still exist. The complete series was released on DVD in 2010, although that edition has since been discontinued and the program remains absent from regular television schedules. Love Thy Neighbour ran for 4 years on ITV. It was not cancelled. It was one of the most watched British sitcoms of its era. It spawned a Hammer Films movie, an Australian sequel series, and a place in the British Film Institute's popular poll for Britain's favourite sitcom, and its central premise today is unbroadcastable on any British network. Love Thy Neighbour was set in a suburban terraced house in Twickenham in the outer London suburbs. Eddie Booth, played by Jack Smethurst, was a white working-class trade unionist. His new next-door neighbours were a black couple, Bill and Barbie Reynolds, played by Rudolph Walker and Nina Baden-Semper. Bill Reynolds was educated. Bill Reynolds was conservative. Bill Reynolds voted Tory. Bill Reynolds was, in almost every way, Eddie Booth's ideological opposite. Every week, Eddie and Bill traded insults. The wives, Joan and Barbie, became close friends and were mortified by their husbands' bickering. The language Eddie used to describe his neighbour was, by modern standards, unbroadcastable. So was some of the language Bill used back. The writers, and the 2 black leads, maintained throughout the show's run and afterwards that the program was intended as satire, that the joke was on the bigot Eddie, that Bill, always the more educated and dignified figure, was allowed to win most of the arguments. Rudolph Walker was born in Trinidad in September 1939. He came to Britain as part of the Windrush generation. He would go on to be awarded the OBE in 2006. And in 2001, he began playing Patrick Truman in EastEnders, a role he still plays today, more than 24 years later. Rudolph Walker has, in interviews given decades after Love Thy Neighbour ended, defended the intention of the original series as a critique of racism, not racism itself. Jack Smethurst, who played Eddie Booth, died in February 2022, aged 89, at his home in Chorleywood, in Hertfordshire. Kate Williams, who played Joan Booth, is still alive. Born in London in December 1941, she has continued to work in British television for more than 50 years. in the crime drama Widows, in EastEnders reunited with Rudolph Walker, and most recently in the BBC medical drama Casualty. Nina Baden-Semper is also still alive. Love Thy Neighbour has never received a full repeat run on British terrestrial television. It was later shown on UK Gold, but has remained absent from the main free-to-air channels. Till Death Us Do Part was one of the most consequential sitcoms in British television history. It ran for 7 series across 10 years on BBC One. It changed what was permissible on British television. It made a national character out of a working-class racist, and its creator spent the rest of his life defending the fact that audiences loved that racist. Johnny Speight was a working-class satirist from the East End of London. He created Alf Garnett, a docker from Woking, a devoted royalist, a conservative voter, a West Ham United fan, and a man who blamed the country's problems on immigrants, the Labour Party, his son-in-law and his wife, in roughly that order. Alf Garnett was played by Warren Mitchell, himself Jewish, himself a Labour voter, himself the polar opposite of the character he made famous. The Garnett family was completed by Dandy Nichols as Alf's long-suffering wife Elsa, whom he addressed throughout the series as Silly Moo. Their daughter Rita was played by Una Stubbs, and Rita's Liverpudlian husband Mike, the Randy Scousegit whom Alf despised for his socialism, was played by Anthony Booth. Anthony Booth was, in a footnote of political history, the father-in-law of a future British Prime Minister. His daughter Sherry married Tony Blair. She would become Sherry Blair. The show attracted the fury of Mary Whitehouse and her clean-up TV campaign. It was one of the first mainstream British programmes to use the word bloody regularly on air. Complaints numbered in the thousands. The writers, however, maintained that the point was satirical. Producer Dennis Mayne Wilson would later concede a failure in this regard. In a documentary given decades later, his view was that Alf Garnett had been created as an anti-hero, to be laughed at, not laughed with, that the intention had been to hold a mirror up to the world and let it see itself. But audiences did not laugh at Alf Garnett. They laughed with him. Millions of viewers found in his rants the frustrations they themselves felt about a changing Britain. Alf Garnett became, unintentionally, a folk hero to the very people the satirist Johnny Speight had wanted to expose. By the end of 1975, ratings and audience appreciation had fallen from the extraordinary levels the programme had enjoyed in the 1960s. The BBC brought the original series to an end, although Alf Garnett would later return in other television productions. Warren Mitchell continued to play Alf Garnett, on stage and in later revivals, until his own death in November 2015, at the age of 89. He won the Laurence Olivier Award for his performance in Death of a Salesman and defended the character throughout the rest of his life. Dandy Nichols died in February 1986, aged 78, of pneumonia and heart disease following a fall. Anthony Booth died on the 25th of September 2017, aged 85. Una Stubbs, later famous as Mrs. Hudson in Sherlock, died in August 2021, aged 84. On the Buses ran for 7 series over 4 years. It was one of the most popular ITV comedies of its era. It spawned 3 feature films, and its central humour, applied to a modern workplace, would today be classified as harassment. Stan Butler was a bus driver at the fictional Luxton and District Traction Company. He was played by Reg Varney. His conductor was Jack Harper, played by Bob Grant. Together, they spent most of every episode either avoiding work, chasing the female bus conductors known in the show as Clippies, or plotting against their overbearing inspector, Cyril Blake, played by Stephen Lewis. The humour, by 1970s standards, was working class, boisterous, and often bawdy. By modern standards, much of it involves men in positions of professional authority making persistent, unwanted advances toward female colleagues. Reg Varney had a particular claim on British history. On the 27th of June 1967, he had opened the world's first automated teller machine, the first ATM, at a Barclays Bank branch in the London suburb of Enfield. He was the first customer to use it. Reg Varney died in November 2008, aged 92. Bob Grant, who played Jack, had a considerably darker story. After the show ended, his career slowed. He struggled with depression for many years. In November 2003, aged 71, he took his own life. It was one of the more tragic ends of any British sitcom lead of the 1970s generation. Stephen Lewis, who played the inspector, died in August 2015, aged 88. Anna Karen, who played Olive Rudge, Stan's downtrodden sister and the wife of Arthur, died in a house fire at her home in Ilford, in East London, in February 2022. She was 85 years old. The London Fire Brigade found no suspicious circumstances. She had been the last surviving principal cast member of On the Buses. On the Buses was not cancelled. It ended naturally. Its 3 feature film spin-offs, On the Buses, Mutiny on the Buses, and Holiday on the Buses, were commercial successes in the early 1970s. Unlike several other programs in this documentary, On the Buses has never disappeared completely. It continues to receive regular repeats on ITV3, although it is now presented primarily as nostalgia television from another era. But its inclusion in this documentary is not about whether the program still airs. It is about whether the program could be made today. And the answer is simple. No modern British broadcaster would commission a workplace sitcom whose central running joke is a driver and a conductor pursuing their female colleagues and outwitting a manager who tries to stop them. The comedy of On the Buses was built on unwanted advances, on power imbalances between men in professional authority and women in junior positions, on physical appearance jokes at the expense of a female character, and on a workplace culture that a modern producer would not describe as comedy at all. On the Buses survives on ITV3 because it was made in 1969. If a writer walked into a commissioning meeting today with the exact same script, it would not survive the meeting. Please Sir was set in the 5th form classroom of Fen Street Secondary Modern, a fictional London school. It was, at its heart, a comedy about a well-meaning young teacher trying to control a class of unruly working-class teenagers. At its peak, it drew 20 million viewers. The teacher was Mr. Bernard Hedges, played by the young John Alderton. His pupils were a group of fictional characters who became household names in Britain in the early 1970s. Eric Duffy, Frankie Abbott, Sharon Eversley, and the rest of the class of 5C. Please Sir was written by John Esmond and Bob Larby, the same men who would later write The Good Life. It ran for 4 series and 55 episodes from November 1968 to March 1972. Why would it not air today? Because the humour of Please Sir depended in part on the dynamic between an adult teacher and a class of young people that a modern safeguarding conscious broadcaster would find uncomfortable. Because some of the pupil characters were played by actors clearly older than the 15-year-olds they were meant to be. Because the running jokes about class, region, ethnicity and gender relations belonged to a 1960s sensibility that has not aged well. John Alderton is still alive. Derek Guyler, the caretaker Mr. Potter, died in October 1999, aged 85. Eric Chitty, who played the elderly Mr. Smith, died in 1977, aged 70. The show spawned a spin-off, The Fen Street Gang, which followed the pupils after they left school. That series ran for 2 years and 3 series. Please Sir was not cancelled. It ended when John Alderton chose to leave the series. But its place in this documentary is straightforward. No modern British broadcaster would commission a comedy in which adult actors, some of them clearly in their 20s, play 15-year-old pupils inside a working-class classroom, with running jokes built on the physical and romantic tension between teenagers and the teachers responsible for their care. The safeguarding conventions of modern British television and the modern understanding of what belongs on screen between adults and minors in a school setting have moved far beyond what Please Sir was built on. That is why it appears here. 8 programmes, 20 years of British television, hundreds of hours of comedy that was watched week after week by tens of millions of British viewers. They came from writers who, in most cases, believed they were writing satire. They came from performers who, in most cases, believed they were making Britain a more tolerant, more thoughtful, more self-aware country. They came from broadcasters who, in most cases, believed they were reflecting the country back to itself. And in many cases, they were wrong. Alf Garnett was meant to be an anti-hero. Instead, millions of viewers cheered him on. Kevin O'Grady was meant to expose racism. Instead, he was pulled off the air within 6 weeks. Rangi Ram was meant to be a warm portrait of a bicultural India. Instead, the character is unlikely to return to mainstream BBC television. Not everyone agrees. Rudolph Walker, the Trinidadian actor who arrived in Britain in the Windrush years, who was awarded the OBE and who has played the same character in EastEnders for over 2 decades, continues to defend Love Thy Neighbour as a critique of racism, not racism itself. Jimmy Perry defended It Ain't Half Hot Mum until his own death in 2016 at the age of 93. His view that the show represented the historical truth of British India as he himself had lived it in a wartime concert party in Deolali. Warren Mitchell defended Alf Garnett until his own death in 2015. Others disagree. Lenny Henry, the 16-year-old who was contractually obliged to appear on the black and white minstrel show, has described his participation in later interviews as a grotesque parody of black people. In his own words, the experience caused him a wormhole of depression that he has never fully escaped. Michael Grade cancelled Mind Your Language at its peak of 18 million viewers because, in his view, the stereotyping had become offensive. The BBC has kept It Ain't Half Hot Mum out of its mainstream repeat schedules. The truth, as usual, sits somewhere between the defenders and the critics. The programmes were of their time. Their time is over. Whether they were racist or satirical or both or neither depends in significant part on who was watching them and who is watching them now. What we can say for certain is this. Every one of these programs was made in good faith by professionals who believed they were doing serious work. Every one of them was watched by millions of Britons who found something in them to laugh at. And every one of them today would not survive a single week in a modern commissioning meeting. Mind Your Language, It Ain't Half Hot Mum, The Black and White Minstrel Show, Curry and Chips, Love Thy Neighbour, Till Death Us Do Part, On the Buses, Please Sir. They laughed, we laughed, today we wince. Tomorrow, perhaps, they will be forgotten entirely. If you'd like more forgotten stories from the golden age of British television, please subscribe to Cinema Peak so the next chapter can find you when it is ready. Until then, thank you for watching.